to make a game in.
I mean, there's times when game development is discipline. It's hard.
It's also harder because there's a lot more people doing it.
I realized that one could be a voice actor at all because I was playing Metal Gear Solid.
Sometimes it comes down to the most ridiculous things that get you the job.
And realized, oh, this is the voice actor. He does this for a living.
Don't be discouraged. Sometimes your worst turns out to be their best.
One of the most exciting things about writing music for games is the feeling of being on the frontier of an entirely new form of artistic expression.
Film and TV is quite linear, you know. Video game, it's very much like a tree. It could branch down this way or it could branch the other way.
In movies and television, it still requires a full crew, which is not necessarily the case in games.
Any games you can be involved in, jump in.
Just make a game you want to play. You know, it's like, that's what I did. You got to work at it. And don't lose the human side.
Start small, finish things, ship things, get them out the door. That is the single biggest piece of advice.
Distinguish yourself by being, I think, making a more personal statement.
We have no idea where this is going, and we are all blindly fumbling in the dark, and it's awesome.
Hello, thanks for joining us here at this BAFTA Guru Live session. My name's Alicia Judge, I'm a video games journalist, and all of these sessions this weekend are part of a year-round programme that supports career starters across films, games and TV. BAFTA, as you guys probably know, is a charitable organisation which funds games programmes such as the BAFTA Young Game Designers, which is amazing. It basically helps kids who are aged between 10 and 18 make their first game. If you're a little bit older, there are scholarships to study at postgraduate level, and there are also a regular yearly timetable of public events. Speaking of, our next big games event will be our annual games lecture on the 4th of October with Media Molecule. If you guys are interested, tickets are available now on the BAFTA website. To find out more about BAFTA's initiative supporting new talent across films, games and TV, please visit BAFTA.org. Cool, so now that we've kind of introduced BAFTA and like what we're doing here, let's have a chat with some of our panelists. So first up, we have Charles Griffiths, who's worked on some really exciting projects. Charles, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Charles Griffiths. I'm the design director at Cavalier Game Studios, which is an independent studio I founded with my brother, James, and Tom Lansdale. And previously, I was ex-Lionhead for the majority of my career, and then a little bit of Electronic Arts as well. And we released our debut game, The Sexy Brutale, last year.
Nice. And I believe we've got a VT that will show some of your work.
Awesome.
Sexy Brutale come from?
My brother. Yeah. What's interesting, first fact on that is that a year on, the theme music is still making me feel slightly queasy. So that's the PTSD you get from
the nervous world of game design.
Yeah, no, it was named by my brother, who does love a good name. He's big on names. There's all the character names quite weird as well. But you know, to us, it had a lot of meaning in the game as well,
sure.
to do with why the mansion's called that, and the character who created the mansion, and sort of how he feels about gambling and things like that. So it was, you know, we never put a name like that out there in order to be like, oh yeah, this will help us get attention.
Sure.
It was never about that. It was the fact, you know, we like silly names. We like, you know, being bold with it. If you're going to do an independent game, why not just, you know, do it? But it, you know, it had meaning to us in the story as well.
It's a great name. But, well, next up on our panel, we have Alex Kanaris. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Sure. So I'm Alex. I'm an indie developer, an art director, do character art and animation. I'm working at Polygon Treehouse, which is a new-ish indie studio based in Cambridge. And prior to that, I was an art director at Sony for quite a long time, about 14 years, ever since university. And yeah, we're currently working on our debut indie game, which is called ROKI.
Cool. Should we take a look at some of your work?
Smooth segue.
Let's. Got more and more intense as time went on.
Just ratcheting it up bit by bit.
And finally, we have Danette Beatty, who's worked on a game so pretty, it's a wonder it doesn't have its own perfume line. Danette.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Danette. I am working as an artist at Us2 Games, and I've been working there for the past few years, and that is actually my first full-time job, and my debut game is Monument Valley 2.
Cool, let's take a look. All right, so in today's session, we're going to talk about just what it takes to dive into your first ever games project. We're going to chat through a lot of different topics, but when we've got about 15 minutes to go before the end, I'm going to throw over to you guys so you guys can ask the panelists whatever burning questions you have. But to kick off, a really good place to start is just to ask you guys, what was your first game? Starting with you, Alex.
My very first game was way back in 2002, and it was a PlayStation 2 game called Ghost Hunter. Yeah, that was straight from university. I was a junior character artist and animator, and at that point in the industry, things weren't so specialized. So as a character artist, animator, you'd make the characters, text the characters, you'd rig, you'd skin the characters, you'd animate the characters, you'd do cutscenes, do all the cinematography. So actually, that was a really good basis to getting good knowledge of everything character arty, so that when we went indie later on, I was able to revitalize those skills. So that was a good starting point.
Looking back at it now, all those years later, do you still think it's a good game?
I think there's good parts of it. The cutscene's good. That's my bit. Yeah, I think there's good elements to it. Obviously, it's aged somewhat, but I think it's okay. Yeah.
Nice. What about you, Charles?
Well, we were discussing this before. It's kind of a tricky question. Like, everyone messes around with games in their spare time, probably, or So I made stuff at university and did like a third-year project game, but it's kind of, does it count? It's all sort of practice and messing around. The first actual commercial game in the industry was Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix.
Oh, nice.
So that was fun. Originally, I was hired by Criterion for Black 2, if anyone knows Black, the shooter. I was so excited about that because I loved Black, and the idea of doing Black 2 and doing a shooting game, I was like, yeah, this is going to be great. I get to design levels for this. And then immediately it would sort of turn up, and it was, oh, the game's canned. How would you like to work on Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix? It's like, oh, well, you know, they're practically the same, right? So, I'm totally ready for that. But yeah, that was just great fun. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. And so like, I still think that's the best one, to be honest, because that had more of a Grand Theft Auto kind of structure, and it let you run around Hogwarts. And really, if you want to run around Hogwarts, I think that still is the only proper way you can kind of do it. So you know that was really good fun to work on, doing little quests and homework quests and stuff for Harry. That was good.
It's funny, isn't it, how we talk about our first games, like, oh, you know, the ones at university don't count, was just fooling around, then we went and we had like our big chew on. It's like talking about a first kiss, you know? There's the ones that you fooled around with, but do they really count? And then later on you go and you have your first proper.
My first game was probably about as ugly as the first kiss as well. Yeah.
What about you, Danette? Where do you sit on the first game kind of front?
First game for me was in university. I was a third year in university, and we basically, everyone in my class, there was about 18 people, were all working on one game that we voted on, and we had to pitch to each other and like figure out what we were going to be doing for the whole year. And as soon as my game wasn't chosen, they're like, oh, so who wants to be the environment lead? And I was like, me, I want to be the environment lead. So like I like taking control over like, you know, trying to learn what the pipeline was and helping other people out with like what they wanted and like what we wanted the game structure to be, and like throwing stuff in Engine and learning Unreal Engine at the time. And then I went to Us 2, which was great. So like my first actual like game in the industry was Monument Valley 2, and that was the first game that I've technically shipped as well. But I still think that I learned a lot from doing the university one, especially working with other people, which was huge for me coming to work for a studio full time, especially moving countries for it from the US.
So, you know, we've all outlined our first games, but I'm curious to know, I guess, how it was structured when you were going through your process. You know, who managed what was your role within the team, and how did you manage your workloads on your first game?
Well, I'll go. So on my very first game, I was a junior. So actually there was several that had a lead, and my lead had a lead, and it was quite a big art team. It was about 50 strong. And so actually there, you basically just had to be a real sponge, I think. And it was the first job since university. And so just really being open to soaking up information and advice from other people, and also to seek out that advice as well. You're surrounded by people who've maybe got more experience, like go and pest them, ask for feedback. And yeah, I think there's a lot you can learn from your first game if you're really open to soaking up all the information. And yeah, I think that's a really good thing. You should enjoy that as well. It's a really good experience.
Charles, how did you manage kind of working within the team and your role within it on your first title?
Yeah, on the first one, in a big studio, there's obviously a lot of structure, and you know, I was in as a kind of level designer, integrator. So on that very first thing, it's kind of very different thing to doing it independently. But I mean, that was a really good entry-level type job, because it was kind of integrating the content and the design that that they already had for the game, but also kind of filling in a lot of gaps that weren't there. And you know, when you find getting to the end of any big game, everything's meant to be perfectly planned, but usually there are lots of gaps anyway. So if you were so inclined and wanted to do more creative things, there was usually gaps in it. There were lots of bits in Harry Potter that were just kind of missing, and they didn't really have a design for yet. So there was plenty of opportunity to kind of come up with stuff as well as be the person implementing it. So
what were some of the things that you put in?
So one of the things, just little stuff like there was a fly through at the beginning of the game, and that I really like, because that is, that's actually, if you run the game, leave it running, that was kind of the teaser bit that runs the game. So in many cases, it's the first thing that people see, and that, it's a good example of this kind of thing. Being in a big studio isn't all just sort of, oh, you're on this treadmill, you just got to do exactly what you're told, because that entire fly through came about because of a friend of mine who was responsible for the cameras in the game. He said, "Oh, I think we can do this intro thing, but some of the executives aren't convinced. But I'm going to be able to put it together really quickly. Do you want to do the events within it, and then we can do something?" So he set up a camera spline thing to fly through Hogwarts, and then I put all the characters in, George and various people and Snape and stuff on the staircase, and we just made a cool thing that was like, this is going to look really good. You're going to have the cool soundtrack, and it's going to fly through, and then I'll have Snape turn to the camera at this point and have it go between George and whatever the other one's called, Fred, and and just make it, throw all this stuff together, and that'd be great. And then then in the end that went in and it proved its point, and that is actually kind of the first thing that people see. So that was like a fun thing to realizing that if you take the initiative and you're not a jerk about it, there probably is stuff you can do even at starting level.
Even at the starter career within a studio, you can still kind of leave an indelible mark.
Definitely,
upon a game that you're working on.
But you do have to be careful with that stuff as well, because I think you can't go into it and just be like, I'm going to make my mark. It's like, that's not actually your job in some ways. Like, it's Harry Potter, it's a huge thing. It's it's not about you in the same way. You've got to be a team player, and so that's kind of important as well. So you've got to know how to present these things.
How did you find that process?
Yeah. So I was almost the opposite. Because Us2 Games is such a small studio, I was a junior artist when I was brought on the team, and there were 4 people doing art full-time, and there was 1 animator who was taking care of all of the character stuff. So there was essentially 3 artists on the levels. So I had a lot of autonomy and a lot of freedom to kind of do what I wanted with the levels. So for my first job, I was given a lot of responsibilities. Like, here's your freedom, make these levels look good. That was the criteria, and every time I would get feedback and making sure that it would look on par with what the rest of the game looked like, which took a very long time for me because it was my first job, and trying to meet the bar of Monument Valley and then do it a little bit better, or try to aim to be a little bit better than the first game for the second one, was like, are you sure that I can do this? Oh, yep, no, I can do this. And it took me a long time to get comfortable with the fact that the art that I was doing would be so present in the game. But as time went on and I got more comfortable with the project, I started having, just a lot more freedom to do what I wanted, and having more ideas about what the design could be for the levels, and making sure that, my own artistic voice could be put in the game, and that was okay to do, because there just wasn't that many people on the teams. We all kind of had to, do a little bit more than just art, So it was a very good experience for me.
It's interesting talking to you both about your experiences of working within a studio as a career starter, where, I think there's a lot of desire for people who are breaking into the industry to think, I'm not going to work for a studio. I'd rather kind of go and strike out and be an indie, and that will be my first dive in. In fact, actually, can we have a show of hands? Who in the audience would like their first game to be part of a studio? Okay, we've got a few. And who would like their first game to be, off their own backs, working by themselves as indies? Okay, cool. So there's a few more hands for people who would like to go in as indies. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of working for a studio as your first game?
I think, this is something where, I get asked a lot by students and people that want to get into games, and it does seem like, a much more common attitude now is that, people want to do their own thing straight away and sort of feel like they're fully expressing themselves, and tend to take a, slightly more dimmer view of joining a studio. But, I think there are huge advantages. These guys might agree. It's the fact that you have to learn at some point. You've got to actually learn the craft of what you're doing, and you're unlikely to pick it all up at university. Game design and game development courses are fairly new. I think the quality of them is variable, to say the least. So at some point you've got to actually learn the craft of what you're doing and see how a game gets made and what everybody on the team does. It's hugely complicated, it's difficult, it's long. So, and I think it's also, it's okay to not know. I think that one of the most common and I think damaging bits of advice given out to young people, given out to people that want to get into games, is just make games. just make games. Like, it's that easy. Hey, you don't want to make games? Just make games, you know? Because you can download Unity, it's all free, you know, so you can just download it and, you know, you'll be the same as anyone else. And it's just not true. Like, you know, it can happen, of course, you get Stardew Valleys and things like that, but that is very much the exception. Yeah. You know, that is an extremely unlikely thing. And I feel like it's sad because it implies that it's a bad thing for, you know, young people to kind of not know what they want to do straight away. And I think that's fine. Like, of course, people don't know, you know, it's fine to not know exactly what sort of game you want to make or how to do it and everything. It's okay to not know how, because, you know, you need to learn and sort of see it and build up some experience. I don't think there should be this, you know, this impression that if you're not making your own stuff, well, you know, what are you really doing? You're just another person in the studio. It's a really bad attitude. I think it's really damaging.
I think it's quite exciting that it's possible. You know, that those engines are there for people to make games straight from university, because they certainly weren't there when I left. It's just a crime. But I agree. I think I definitely learned a lot. I think especially it takes the pressure away in some ways. That if you go to a studio, you can get your wings, you can learn how things work, you can learn about the development cycles and like alpha, beta, and master and all those different phases. You can learn about QA. And it's just a really good opportunity to just soak up all that information. And obviously, the internet is a great resource. You can go and you can go and find out lots of different things, but also you could probably go down some wrong rabbit holes that actually, if you just go and ask someone or get some advice from someone, it's kind of nice. But that's definitely, I think, in making, you know, we're making ROKI at the moment, me and Tom and the rest of the Polygon Treehouse team, and I think we probably take for granted how much knowledge we have, just that feels like it was always there from like 14 years of working at Sony on those various different games. So yeah, there probably is like a sweet spot as well. That we stayed at Sony for ages. There was some really great stuff, and we learned a lot there. And there were some really talented people. But yeah, it's where's that point where you venture out? But do you think the fact that the tools are available and you can experiment with them in your spare time, you can be slightly like risk averse? You know, play around, see if you get something, see if you find your voice, what it is you want to make, get something you're really passionate about, and then make the jump.
It's interesting that you mentioned Stardew Valley as one of the touchstones of the games of someone who makes their first game. It does amazingly, sells really well. Eric Bannon is such a talented game developer. But it is interesting when you delve further into his story of how he made it. It took a process of years. There's a really good article on GQ that talks to him about the process. And when we talk about burnout a lot in the industry, because he was doing everything by himself, working on it from the get-go, it was the tortured artist sort of stereotype, which I think has a lot of glamour because we're a creative industry, but I wonder whether we glamorize the idea of striking out on your own slightly too much.
Yeah, because I think people have just got to not just look at the end product. You know, I think because if you just look at what came out the other side, you see Stardew Valley and it's like, hey, that's great. But if you look at what went into some of these things, you might not want to live that life, because Stardew Valley 1 is particularly bleak and difficult. I think, that's only somebody in a unique situation of, young, single, but not even having to sort of necessarily take on all the rent and things like that. Yeah. It's, these are quite unique situations, and nor are they particularly sustainable. And I think, that's the other thing about working at a studio. It might feel like sort of quite a bleak message, but having that kind of experience gives you a career rather than a hobby. It creates something that is sustainable. So if you are out of work, you can get another job. Or if you start doing an indie thing and it doesn't go well, you've still got options. Whereas if you're just out on your own and you've got no experience whatsoever, then it's a much more risky situation.
But, Stardew was a fantastic idea and a fantastic game. And that's really where things start from. The seed is finding your first idea. What are some of the best places to look for inspiration for your first game, Danette?
For inspiration for your first game, it's almost like a combination of things that you're interested in, the type of game that you want to make, which is hard enough to figure out when you're first starting to make games, and what your abilities are as well. I feel like when you're starting to make games, a lot of people say, oh, I want to make Stardew Valley as my first game. And that's a totally valuable route if you have those kinds of situations that you're in where you might not need to pay rent, or just not as financially, I don't know, you don't need the money as much as other people might at that time. But when you have the abilities that you have, you know what you can do, and it's kind of important to balance what your inspirations are of media, what type of games you like, even outside of games, what kind of experiences you like. I like coming of age stuff a lot. It's something that I've grasped of okay, I know that I like this kind of topic. What is the kind of media that I gravitate towards, or outside things where I kind of feel like it resonates with me a lot, because a lot of games that people want to tell are personal stories right now. And I feel like personal stories are probably where a lot of indies are getting inspiration from, just events that have happened in their own life. So taking that into account, and then having an idea where you can kind of limit the scope of what you're doing and say, what can I accomplish and how long do I want to spend on this? Because doing your own game is kind of essentially running your own business. You are running a business, you are saying, this is the timeline that I want to do this in, I don't want to make this game forever, so you kind of have to set limits for yourself on what are my abilities? Maybe I can only make a visual novel game. I can do some drawings for that, and I can set up some, writing. Those kinds of things are available to people and might not need as much, research and advanced technology as Monument Valley, for instance. So it kind of depends on what your inspirations are, what kind of stories you want to tell, and the technical side of what can I do and how long would that take me, and do I have that time available to me?
I think for inspiration as well, it's good to cast your net really wide and make sure that your brain food is good, so that you're not just consuming a diet of the big AAA games, or even just games that you're reading books, all different genres. You take an interest in nature and travel and architecture and film, world cinema. I think making sure that you're kind of building up a kind of a really wide reference that's not just AAA games or even just games in general is really good. So it gives you such a simmering pool of good stuff to be drawing on, and so there's less of a danger that I think awareness of what games are doing and what's in a particular genre is really important as well. But I think having a wide pool of reference is really good when with the ideas you're going to be generating, they're pulled from more diverse and interesting sources, and you're more likely to come up with something that excites you and excites other people. Because you're right, making a game is hard, and that idea has got to be exciting enough, not just to maintain you whilst you're making it and keep you excited about it. It's got to excite other people. It's potentially got to excite publishers as well. And it's rare that when you're coming up with an idea for a game, that it will be a fully formed game that will land on your plate. It might just be, it will be just an element. It might be an image, or it might be a setting, or it might be a mechanic. And so then learning how to evolve those ideas and going wide with them and just brain dumping everything around that idea and then stripping it back and trying to refine it. It's a really interesting process. I think when we were looking at what game we wanted to make, we knew we wanted to make an adventure game. So that was good because we had a creative restriction there, which made it a lot easier because all those other genres you could just dink. So that made it much easier then to focus on, okay, what kind of adventure game do we want to make? And we had 4 or 5 nuggets of ideas that we were evolving, and then I think you'll kind of know when the one drops that you want to make. Because we had ones that we were both like, I like this one, Tom liked this one, and then we stumbled across Scandinavian folklore, and then everything else went, and we just kind of went, right, that's it, and we both got really excited. So.
No, it's true. There's a reason why Miyamoto at Nintendo has famously said publicly that he likes to hire non-gamers, people who aren't game developers, and you look at Nintendo's games, you look at Mario and their approach to game design. There's a YouTube series called Game Maker's Toolkit, which I really encourage you guys to check out. That's amazing, that delves into a lot of the really interesting decisions that Nintendo make. And it's because they pull people in who don't speak the language of games that's already established. So they bring in something new and fresh, and they change the rules, and suddenly the rest of the games industry goes, that was a really good idea. And you look at us two in Monument Valley. I mean, wasn't one of the biggest inspirations? It was Escher, right? Yeah. And those kind of drawings.
Yeah, I feel like at first when I started working there, I didn't quite realize the value of having inspirations that weren't just game or even illustration focused. A lot of my inspirations were just things that I looked at within my own circle that weren't really like taking a step into more like art history or buildings and architecture, even to start with. And I didn't really know a lot about, architecture or even Escher's work when I started working there. And like as I started looking at more of these different references, I realized how important it is to look at things outside of your bubble and like outside of the circle of stuff that you like to look at, because you can draw inspiration from so much more than that. Like I look at things on Pinterest even, I'm like, I don't really like the look of that, so I'm gonna click that because I wanna see what else that comes up with that isn't something that I would normally just stumble across if I just picked everything that I liked. It would all look the same.
Yeah,
I think
it's thinking about why you like it, and that kind of provokes all sorts.
Yeah,
I completely agree about everything they're saying about the diversity of inspiration. Like that is a huge thing. I mean, I always just thought that the worst designers and game creators is just like the same narrow set of interests. You're just watching whatever is new at the cinema. You're just playing whatever is the newest big game, and you don't read at all. It's just like that, and it's all going to feel the same when it's just if you're only looking at the same stuff as everyone else, especially when it's recent stuff. It's just well, then that's how trends, samey stuff starts happening. Is you just realise it's completely being pulled out of what is current now and nothing else.
Sort of culture.
Yeah,
I think it's nice to have an awareness of what's going on, and I play a lot of games to have a good awareness of what's going on. But I think part of being a creator is learning to then be really critically analysing those and what you think are good things about them and what you don't like, rather than the fact that something's made it into a game doesn't necessarily make it good. It might be that's it's not a seal of approval, the fact that something's made it in there. So I think having awareness of like mechanics or what's happening if you're making an adventure game and what other games or studios are doing in that genre is valuable. But I think you've got to you've just got to be like really critical when you're analysing stuff. Why was that done, and looking behind the reasons.
Yeah, I think it's just like casting a wide net. But definitely, when you're working in a genre, you want to play everything in that genre. And I still love and play all the big AAA releases and everything. It's just making sure that you kind of got a diverse diet of stuff as well, not just the same thing. But the other thing, I think that the thing about bringing in non-gamers and stuff to Nintendo and everything, it's the bit where I think you can't just have the diverse inspiration and just be I have all these interests and somehow it's a positive that I don't know anything about games, because if you just have that, then you don't have the craft. And then I think the other bit is when you are into games and into all of it, reading about it and even the AAA stuff and what's big and what's Battle Royale and everything like that. If you're actually into that, then you are understanding the craft of how mechanics are put together. I think it's not just a blanket good thing to be like, oh well, I'm good at this because I don't know anything about games. It just means I think people end up not being able to execute. They might have the good ideas, but they won't have the craftsmanship to actually be able to execute them. It'll just be, sort of an attempt at saying something really interesting and creative, and it might be inspired by all these wonderful things, but will you actually have the ability to get it across?
Well, I mean, speaking of craft, like drilling down into some more practical tips for your first game, what happens if, say, you are a really great programmer, but you actually don't really know how to do art and you're making your first game? Do you have any tips for people who their idea doesn't necessarily match their abilities, but they still want to push it through?
I think, as Danette was saying earlier, like playing to your strengths and matching your ideas to your abilities is pretty important. And I think that's a really good exercise to do. It's to look at creative restrictions and say, okay, well, I know that I'm good at this, I'm not good at this, so therefore, how can I take this idea that I have and make it work with the skills that I have? And that might actually, looking at that problem from that angle, might produce something that's really exciting and new. It's on the flip side of skewing it and looking at how you could achieve that idea by taking some of those parts away. Finding collaborators is a good one, and you might find that in meeting collaborators, they bring something else to the table rather than just someone to like be an art monkey and just to churn out the artwork. Actually having someone to have a bit of back and forth with and to run ideas, bounce ideas off. I think I was speaking to one of my, when we were thinking about forming the studio, I was chatting to one of my childhood friends who's an engineer, and he was saying his one bit of advice about starting your own business was do it with another person. So that you have someone to bounce ideas off, that when you go on holiday, the game doesn't stop. You know, you come back and you find, oh, there's some good stuff, it's quite nice. But having that, the contrasting views is really nice. I think so. Collaboration is a really good thing and something to be really embraced, and you should go into it in an open way rather than being like, it's my idea, I'm protecting my idea. You know, allow people in, make it better, make it more rounded, and yeah.
I mean, underpinning all of this is that, you know, you might have a really good idea, but you also need to fund this first game development project. And one of the ways that people often look for this is through investment. In your experience, what are investors looking for in a pitch for someone's first game?
I mean, funding is just such a complicated thing. It encompasses so much different stuff, and it comes back to what you were saying as well. But I think you need to decide up front, especially if you're doing something independently. You've got to decide up front exactly what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it. Are you Lucas Pope doing Papers, Please, or are you the Stardew Valley guy doing that? Is it a case of I am going to do all the things? The game is going to be this small little game I make myself. If you're a programmer and you have this great idea and you can't do art, well, you need an artist. Or you need a different idea. That's what it's going to come down to. So, picking up front, what is it going to be? Are you going to have a team, or are you going to do it on your own, or and that will play into the funding thing. And I think that's another thing that anyone even thinking about doing anything independently has got to think clear-eyed at the start about what they're doing with the funding situation. I would say people need to seriously avoid getting into an open-ended situation. A situation where it's like, well, I'm doing a thing, but I have absolutely no idea when it's going to be done. I have absolutely no idea how it will ever be finished, But as long as I start, then I'm making progress. And it's just really the size and complexity of making a game is, it's not like, it's like running a marathon. It can't be a case of like, well, I'll just sort of walk, I'll hop on one foot or something, and as long as I'm making progress, like it's going to be okay. It's like, it's not, you need to have that plan, and that usually comes down to funding. It's like, do you actually have the money to take you to the finish line? And if you don't, then that's got to be at the top of your agenda, informing what you're doing. Are you going to work for X period of time in order to make a demo, and then start taking that demo around? What we did with the Sex Brutale was, we knew that we were going to go to a publisher. So then it's just a case of like, having a smaller goal of the idea of we are going to finish the game. It's like, that's not going to happen. That's not even on the agenda. That is not a thing that can happen because we know the scale and the scope. That will not happen. So therefore, the objective is a different one. The objective is make the demo that we want to make, and then that's it. And then when we made that, when we got our demo, we stopped working. And that's the bit where, I see a lot of people just kind of continuing to grind away at stuff. And it's a bit like, hey, look, if you've got your vertical slice, if you've got your build, if you've got your demo, just stop, because there's no point. Like, you're not going to take you to the finish line. So now all your focus needs to be on pitching that demo to get the funding, because that is actually how you're going to get to the finish line. So when we got our demo, we stopped, and 100% of the focus became on pitching. And that's it, because that's the only problem, because either it gets signed or we're dead. Which isn't it, and that's not the best situation either, by the way. You don't necessarily want to have the situation where all your eggs are in one basket, but sometimes you just got to do that.
So how do you structure that pitch once you get into a pitch setting?
So usually, it's like a demo, which is part of the pitch, and there'll be a pitch deck usually. It's like a PDF slide document, basically, multi-page document. So I think one of the, saying like what do publishers look for, and this is just a good thing in general, is just knowing how to distill down what your game is into like an elevator pitch, so that someone asks you in a few lines, you can sum up what it is. If you need to be able to succinctly say, the game is this. And maybe, some people, when they're doing a project, they'll define core pillars that the game is structured around, which will define the vision for the game. And so being able to to, for you developing the game to know exactly what it is, what kind of beast it is, and then they're not just good stuff for like the pitch documents, they're also good when you're in development as well, because you might go through development and you're working on this stuff every day, and actually you're so close to it, and sometimes you might want to take a step back and just make sure that everything you're doing still aligns with the vision of the game. So having that very clear vision defined for the game and what it is a really good idea. And so generally that will go up front from our experience, and then maybe some information about who the team is or are, and then broad schedules and financial stuff, and any kind of accolades that you might have for the game. But basically that's a kind of just an info drop, really clear, not meandering, just the information that you definitely need so that it can be assimilated very easily by someone who's probably a very busy person who sees a lot of those. So yeah.
Do you know of any lesser known or alternative funding routes beyond sitting in front of an investor and asking for pitches?
We recently won secured some funding from the UK Games Fund, and that was we were really chuffed about that. And so that was quite cool. I think there are other government grants as well, and other organisations. There's some EU stuff, which might be a little bit tricky. What happens with that stuff? But I think there are lots of different grants and other things out there, government or otherwise. And also some other, I guess it depends whether the game is a commercial product. They have stuff like the Arts Council as well. So it depends. There's lots of different things to explore. You've got to root them out.
Yeah, I feel like more recently, a lot of people that I know that are making indie titles really focus on the art as well, because that can be such a huge selling point, because I did some freelance work before I worked for Us2 on OOBLETS, and OOBLETS was a very much visual first game. Like, here is what the art is going to look like, here is what the feel of the game is going to be, here is what the aesthetic is, and that was kind of what allowed them to secure funding, because they had such a strong idea of what the game could be and how to present that a lot of people are doing that. Like Sable is doing that now as well with Raw Fury. There's a lot of people that are kind of taking a more visual first, and then we can flush out what the rest of the game is. But the selling point can sometimes be quite harshly the art direction in a lot of ways.
I mean, so we're going to throw open to questions in a minute from you guys, but just before we do that, leading on from that point, how do you make a buzz on social media about your game? Because that's actually really powerful for a first game when people might not necessarily know who you are or what you do. If you can generate a buzz, you look at Sable, they created a buzz through their art, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like visuals is the huge thing. So being able to collaborate with someone or an artist on something and being able to push that style a bit and having that time to build up what your artistic hand is. What can I do artistically? If it's 2D drawing, then how can I push things in a direction that we might not have seen before? Sable looks a lot like Morpheus. We look at that and say, okay, we haven't seen that in games yet. So a lot of people are looking for things that aren't necessarily by the book. This is what a AAA game looks like. This is what realism looks like. But what could games look like if we weren't doing only that stuff right now? And I think that's a lot of what people's eyes are drawn to.
I think some of the stuff with social media, though, I think it's better for different things. I think in terms of, getting the gifts of a great art style and getting attention on a game that you're looking to get signed, it can be really, really useful for that. And I guess OOBLETS is a great example of something that's, very sort of word-of-mouthy, social media type thing. But I think where there's another side to it where I'm not sure exactly how powerful it really is. And I thought what a great example recently was Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. And the guy doing that, I forget his surname, Johanneman something, he wrote a really honest blog post of just saying, my game has not sold so well. It got coverage and stuff like that. And it had a lot of social media buzz. And the thing that he pulled out that was sort of particularly weird was saying, that he's sold fewer copies of the game than he has Twitter followers. And he was kind of thrown out in the question of, who the hell is following me that isn't buying my game? Because it's kind of, that's what, that's sort of his thing, And so that's the thing where I think social media can kind of, it can make something look big, But then there's a lot of these games that then they sort of come out, they finally reach market, and they don't actually sell very well. So it's kind of all this social media buzz, and it hasn't really come through. So it's tricky. It's sort of, it does matter, but does it matter? You know, you used to work for IGN and things like that. I'm not sure how much social media buzz is it going to take to compare to one IGN video. And you know, IGN is a hell of a big audience. So.
A lot of people always asked, how do we get featured? It involves sacrificing goats, rain dances.
Yeah, I think knowing who to talk to as well. Like OOBLETS might have been, picked up because someone from Double Fine saw that and kind of passed it on. So it's a lot of like who sees it on social media rather than having that huge audience.
Yeah,
I think it's nice to like we share stuff, ROKI stuff, pretty much most weeks, and it's been good for us, not just on like the awareness for the publisher side, like making connections, like you're saying, having other people notice it, so then you connect with them. And actually, from an advice point of view, that's really handy. And then they could maybe signal boost stuff. I think the other side of the social media stuff and sharing stuff that I really like, I think part of being in Sony for so long, or a big AAA studio where everyone has to be very secretive about what they're making for very long periods of time. It could be 3 or 4 years. You can't say anything about what it is you're making. And now, obviously, we're conscious of not spoiling the game for anyone. You don't want to do that, give away too much or show too much. But the fact that we can just go, I've made something on the Friday, I'm going to share it on Saturday is really cool. And it also means that it's important because now we're a small team rather than being a big team. Obviously, we can bounce ideas off each other, but being able to get feedback from people who might want to play the game or are interested in the game about what they like and what they don't like is really cool. And that's a really nice, rather than just developing in a bubble, being able to get feedback on what you're making is great. And we had some really awesome feedback the other week where we shared something and someone was asking questions about some of the accessibility and the fonts and the readability of stuff, and it was like, actually, that was really awesome feedback. And we're sometimes so close to what we're making that you don't really see that. And so to get some of those fresh perspectives is really valuable. I think you've got to be, if you're open to it, you've got to be open to, just taking all that feedback. It's good. Sure.
Yeah, and having that community can also, breed other forms of funding like Patreon as well, which is just a very good thing for creators to be able to have.
Nice. All right, well, we've got about 10 minutes left, and we've got some microphones running around. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yeah, just here.
Hi, thanks very much for that talk. That's fantastic. My name is Mark Jackson, and I'm the founder of a company called PlaceJam, and it prompts the collaboration between game developers and other disciplines that maybe don't have any connections with the games industry. My question is, in the industry at the moment, be it through indie games or AAA games, where does that collaboration occur in the sort of design timeline between game developers and disciplines that maybe have no association with the industry? So disciplines like architecture, landscape architecture, interior design. It's exciting that you mentioned the innovation that can occur when these collaborations come about. But there doesn't really seem to be a mechanism at the moment for that to occur, and it's maybe a bit haphazard and just depends on who you might know personally.
So I think, social media is quite good for some of that stuff, or if you need a consultant, there's this responsibility on the developer ultimately, basically, to be pushing out into the world and trying to make those connections. We've got so the game is based on Scandinavian folklore. I'm from Sheffield. Tom's from around near Ely. So we wanted to make sure that we got things right. So we have a Nordic language consultant on the game, and so that was something we were conscious of not messing up. And so we knew it was important to kind of reach out and find those people. I think again, it's probably being a sponge and wanting to push out of game dev. If there's an element of your project that has something that could do with advice and consulting, it's your responsibility to go out there and find it.
I think some of the stuff is just, it's very hard with those collaborations, and I do think making games it's very messy and complicated and weird, and the times, obviously when I was working at Microsoft, like they're big enough to have the sort of budgets to involve people outside of it. you know, completely outside of games, but like say consulting with people where you think, oh, well, this would be useful because they're specialists in this area, but they don't know anything about game development. And I don't know, it hasn't always been wildly successful, to be honest, because it's very hard. Making games is just quite a unique and strange thing. And when people come in, I think possibly the best example is just writing and stories in general. Like sometimes for, you know, certain games and everything, a very typical kind of film approach works, and other times it really kind of doesn't. So if you try and take hard rules, like I think there may be many architects and things like that, to take, for example, would probably look at lots of game environments and be like, oh, you know, this should sort of be better in this way, blah blah. But the tricky thing with it, you know, architecture and film and even storytelling rules is that often in games you kind of need to break them. You know, you do need to sort of break all those rules, and specialists in those areas would say you can't break those rules. It doesn't work. But if you sort of know how players take in information and the way they move around and the way that they do things, it kind of means that, you know, I understand why the rule is there. I understand why this rule about characterization is there, but it's just a little bit different in a way that's very hard to explain. When you get people outside of it that then spend a lot of time in game development, then, you know, then it's real gold dust. It's like they understand how to take, you know, the rules of their industry or their specialism, and then they see, you know, what games make like, and they're actually able to bridge that gap. You know, that's great, but that I think that takes quite a lot of experience. It takes time. It takes time, I think, to bring those people in and then get them to really understand how they're going to need to kind of adapt their own rules and stuff for the sort of weird, messy process of making games.
Yeah, I feel like the collaborating with people outside of the industry is probably something that is almost a luxury sometimes, especially like in smaller studios like OOBLETS Games. Like we try to consult people when we have something that like a lot of us are unfamiliar with. But as far as our games go, like Monument Valley 2 was based on a mother and child because all of us can relate to being a child and all of us have mothers, essentially, in some form or another. So like it was kind of a personal enough thing where we can put ourselves in that, where like you might have inspiration for the art and inspiration for different types of things, but as far as the story goes, it was something that all of us kind of had like a relation to, at least in some point or another. So like if you can't find those connections with people outside the industry, it's also important to just being able to pull those personal stories so that you at least have a basis to start from.
I think that when you throw things like augmented reality and smartphones into the equation and you're actually starting to play games out in the public realm, it might be beneficial to start to collaborate with people who are designing those physical spaces and maybe leveraging off some of their sort of design knowledge and intentions of what the spaces are for, and maybe combined with game developers, there could be some really interesting synergies there.
Cool.
For sure.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah, just here down at the front.
Hi. I'm a variety stand-up comedian and actress, and I'm speaking on behalf of my brother right now. My brother Dujon. By the way, side note, these seats are very comfy, so if I sound very tired, it's not your fault. You guys sound lovely. These feel like DFS couches. My question is, on behalf of my brother, is it possible to gain internships, no matter low pay, no pay, within the games companies or anything like that, with low qualification, meaning like, you know, entry level or something like that? If so, why?
So yes. So there's generally junior positions, but they do some studios. I guess it depends on like per company policy. Will offer internships, paid ones at some of the times. A lot of the be able to get one of those is still based on, you know, having a show reel or a portfolio of work, so they can see something there. I was kind of, when I was at university, I was kind of mortified when I got out of university and found out no one really cared about what degree I had, because they just care about the portfolio. You know, it's like the grades don't matter. It's the kind of the standard of the work. And if you had someone who had amazing grades but a poor portfolio versus someone who had no qualifications but amazing portfolio, then the person with the from an art point of view, the person with the amazing portfolio will get the job. I think you've just got to try and seek them out. They do exist, not everywhere, but But yeah, just contact each studio, I guess, or just find their email address and see if anyone's offering anything.
Yeah, and another great way to gain experience if like you don't have those contacts at those companies is just to do game jams even and just make small projects that you can then show, because those are free events where you can just join along. You don't even need to have like go to a location. A lot of the time you can work remotely and just be a part of something and like show off what you're doing as well.
Game jams is a really good shout, actually,
Yeah.
because then you might find yourself paired up with someone in your team that is slightly more experienced. You can learn off them, and then you've got something for your portfolio at the end. Plus, they could introduce you to a contact.
Absolutely.
So that's actually a really nice way to get in.
And there's usually like each city will have its own indie meetups as well, even outside the jam stuff, which is really nice. And you'll meet people like potential collaborators, or you just bounce ideas off people. It's like BAFTA crew is a great example of meeting up with other people. And forming connections. So, yeah.
Any other questions? That was a really good question, by the way.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, just at the back.
Hi guys, it's been really interesting to hear kind of, the journeys you've each had, and they've all been so very, very unique. One of the questions that I very much want to ask you is, so you've done your first demo, your vertical slice, or you've got your art board, you know exactly what you're doing. You go out there, you're pitching, and no one bites. When do you stop?
That's a great question, because it's kind of the sadder, more negative side of things that people don't talk about. Because the reality is that there probably is a point where you should stop on that thing. But, maybe on that idea. But, but that's another thing where you want to take a pragmatic approach of going, well, I'm going to make this demo, or we're going to make this demo, or whatever. We're going to pitch it. We have this much money, or we have this much time, But, yeah, if nobody bites and you feel like you have actually been around, then, I'm fairly skeptical that I think if you get a second chance with the same publisher, for example, I think if they've said no once, then even if you add another 3 months' work or whatever, it's unlikely to shift. I think so. If you've literally talked to everyone, then it might. I guess once you felt like you have gone through all the publishers, all the ones that were of interest to you, then maybe that's time to shelve that idea. The idea isn't dead. It might have another time. And if you have that pitch already, well then that's not wasted. You'll always have that pitch, and maybe the next time you're pitching something else, if they don't go for that, you could say, well, if we've got 10 minutes, I could show you this other thing, and maybe so it doesn't. You can create a situation. I think if you wrap up the pitch, if you wrap up the demo into something tangible and done, then it won't be wasted. Hopefully, it won't be wasted. It'll be something. But if you go into one of these sort of open-ended situations where it's just like, oh, I just made bits of the game, you never ever packaged up into something pitchable, then you've got a problem.
I think also it's good, like if you do get a knockback, like get some feedback and find out what they didn't like about it. Slightly painful as it might be, because then it might, you might find that again they're probably looking at the game from quite a commercial aspect, and maybe they're seeing something that's problematic that you didn't see. And so even if you do get a knockback, like go back and try and get some feedback just to have visibility. Maybe you won't glean anything from it, but it's a really valuable thing to do. So.
Yeah, because if they're willing to do that, then definitely find out. Because I think that's the other thing is that if you get your game rejected by a publisher, there's just so many possible reasons it could be. And one of the biggest ones might just be portfolio. Mm-hmm. I mean, it might be. I suppose the other thing is don't kid yourself. Like you may, it may, like if it's got problems. If other people are saying, I just don't think it's that great, then that's your problem. But other things where you just think, well, I had it all. Like it's got, the graphics are amazing, everything's great, and it still get. How could it possibly be rejected? It'll probably just be because the publisher has a portfolio. It has certain markets they want to be in, certain markets they don't. So it may just be that your game just doesn't fit, and it's not that it's bad. I think just kind of, there's lots of games that were sort of rejected by other people that then went on to get signed by somebody where there was a fit, So.
And if all else fails, sacrifice a goat.
Yeah.
And on that last tip, that's all we've got time for. But if you have any other burning questions, absolutely come to the front. People will be hanging around after. And thank you guys so much for coming. As I said at the beginning, if you're interested in going to more BAFTA Games events, in October we have a lecture with Media Molecule, which should be great. Look at BAFTA.org for tickets for that. But in the meantime, can we have a massive round of applause for our panelists?